I don't necessarily think that it's a super big secret. I think that it's just there's people trying to recycle parts too much. And, they'll end on, oh, this apex seal failed, it's crap, yada, yada, when realistically 90% of their motor has 150,000 miles on it, and the seal can only do so much.
Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we've got Aaron Parker joining us. And Aaron is best known for his bright pink FD RX-7 drift car. You've possibly already seen Aaron competing in Formula Drift in the US. His RX-7 also starred in the Netflix show Hyperdrive. Aaron's also no stranger to camera. He's appeared in the Donut Media HiLow series as well. On top of that, he's a man of many talents. He's also running his own professional wiring workshop as well, producing high-quality professional motorsport wiring harnesses. This episode dives deep into Aaron's background, how he got involved in cars, particularly why he got bitten by the rotary bug. Now, I am a rotary fanatic, so I'm not trying to have a go at rotary lovers here, but let's be honest, the RX-7, the 13B rotary engine, does not have the best name in terms of reliability. And we dive into why that's become the case, where the reliability problems are with the RX-7's 13B engine, why tuning these does need to be dealt with carefully, and some of the considerations when it comes to building a reliable 13B. In particular, we also talk about turbo selection and what Aaron's doing in order to compete with larger capacity engines in drifting, and how he's able to get the most out of his 13B. From here, we move on to talk about wiring and why a lot of people get maybe scared off when it comes to producing their own wiring harnesses. We'll learn about how Aaron got involved and what his business has become these days. Also, the often asked question of how long does it take to produce a professional wiring harness? We dive deep into that, and you'll learn why these harnesses, as a part of that, do become quite an expensive component to produce. Before we dive into our interview, just for those who are new to the podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to tune engines, how to build wiring harnesses, and we also cover other topics including race driver education, car setup, and data analysis, all the way through to fabrication. Relevant to today's topic, we've got our practical standalone engine management tuning course. And this teaches you, as its name implies, how to tune an aftermarket standalone ECU. Now, I know that this is a topic that a lot of people are scared of, particularly when you're faced with a freshly installed ECU with no base map. This can be a little bit daunting knowing what to do first and what order to progress in. Well, to make this really simple, we've broken the entire tuning process down into the HPA 10-step process. By doing this, each step of that process is quick and easy to complete. In no time, you've got a properly tuned engine delivering great power and torque, and most importantly, great reliability. Now, the course itself is generic. It's applicable regardless what ECU you're tuning or what type of engine you're tuning. However, as we move through the course, at the end, we have our library of worked examples, which is where you can watch that 10-step process being applied to a real engine. We vary the type of engine we're tuning as well as the ECU we're using. Relevant to today's topic though, we've also got an FD RX-7 worked example, and that is on the Adaptronic ECU, although everything to do with tuning the rotaries is applicable regardless what ECU you're personally tuning. That particular engine is a stock 13B running an aftermarket turbo kit, actually the same turbo that is on Aaron's drift car, producing around about 420 rear wheel horsepower on pump gas. Also, because we dive into the world of motorsport wiring, we do have our wiring courses, our wiring fundamentals course, and our professional motorsport wiring harness construction course. And this dives deep into the background understanding of what goes into a wiring design, wiring harness design, how the circuits are designed, how they're fused, how to perform concentric twisting, how to work with autosport connectors, the specific crimp tooling that we use, and everything else. Again, nice simple step-by-step process that you can apply to building your own professional harness, and worked examples in that course as well. As usual, we'll put a link to those courses in the show notes, and as a podcast listener, you can also use the coupon code podcast75. That's going to get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. Again, there'll be a link in the description to those courses. All right, with our introduction out of the way, let's get into our chat with Aaron now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Aaron. Great to have you on board. Thanks for joining us today. And as we usually do, let's give our listeners a little bit of background information on how you got involved with cars in the first place.
Cool. Yeah, so I started getting into, I guess, I don't want to say cars, but motorized and building things as like a toddler. You know, my first presents were always like Legos and things that I could build things with, you know, which fast forward turned into me building, you know, planes and cars and motorcycles out of Legos. And then when I got older, that translated into BMX and, you know, anything mechanical that I could build and go fast with, you know. And then as soon as I was able to kind of twist my wrist to propel myself on like a motorcycle, like my oldest sister, Nicole, gave me her little 50cc Honda. It was game over, man. I was like hooked on it. You know, that from go-peds to building the little mini bikes. And then when I could drive finally, the first week I had my license, I did like almost like 100-yard burnout in the rain in my sister's Mustang, which, you know, you look back and you laugh, but she wasn't too pumped on that. But yeah, that's how it goes, you know.
So it sounds like maybe from their upbringing, you could have gone one or two ways, be it four wheels or two. So how did you settle on cars and not motorcycles?
I actually settled on motorcycles first because it was the most affordable thing. Well, I was hooked on cars, but obviously my first car, I ended up getting hit going through a intersection. Someone ran a red light and pretty much totaled me. I'm actually pretty lucky to be alive, but there's like pictures of my 94 GSR Turbo. It was like 99% complete, but it had one fender that had a small ding in it. And I remember explicitly driving through this intersection. I was on my way to soccer practice, and I just picked up this brand new eBay fender. It was like $230, which was a grip back then. But for a GSR like fender, that was the last missing piece, and I was going to install it after soccer practice. And just going through that intersection, and then boom, it's just like the loudest noise that I could imagine, and just lights out. You know, I woke up, this lady's like running over to me, slow motion. You know, she's like screaming, and like I just like, you know, I was like, oh crap, that was a hard hit. You know, so I'm like looking left and right kind of thing. Everything was like functioning. My thumb hurt a little bit, but I ended up jumping out the passenger side door. And I remember looking at the side of the fender that I was going to replace, and the whole car was just completely destroyed, like smashed in, A-pillar, like bent up. And I was just thinking like my car. And the lady's like, are you okay? You know, I'm like, no, I'm fine. But yeah, that was a hard hit.
The fender was the least of your problems, it's safe to say.
Yeah, the fender was very small piece. It actually didn't even matter in the grand scheme of things because I could have lost my life.
So from that first car, and obviously not a great ending to it, sort of where did you go to next?
That you know, I needed a vehicle to get to and from work. So, you know, I bought a street bike. It was a CBR 600RR, a 2004, and I commuted back and forth from my hometown about 45 minutes through this canyon, which is where I always tell people that's where I learned like speed. You know, I'd leave at like 4:30 a.m., go through the canyon, which was roughly 35-ish miles, and then through the city a bit, there and back every day for nearly what it had to be like 2 years. So I got pretty quick on that thing. I was like going behind the local shops where they'd throw off the bikes' race tires because we have a local track, and I would just take them and mount them myself. And obviously I'd put them on my favorable side, you know, and which kind of bit me in the ass a couple times, truthfully, because those tires aren't as good. Well, you learn very quickly which tires are good, you know, to remount versus
Sure.
ones that are just clapped out and heat cycled. But put 21,000 miles on that bike in 2 years. And I rode that thing until one day I was like, you know what? Like, I need to sell this thing because I'm getting in a lot of trouble. I got like a reckless driving ticket. I did, I think it was 87 in a 35 zone past a biker cop, which, got the bike impounded, and it's like a mandatory $30 a day. Plus you got to get like the CHP sign off, and then it sits, and it was a lot of money.
Safe to say the bike was probably not going to get you anywhere good.
Yeah, for sure.
So back to four wheels, obviously.
Yeah, I was like, you know what? I'll sell this thing. I could put that money into building the next car, and that's kind of what did. I just saw it as like a death wish. It was like everyone's like, oh, you're going to go down at some point, and I didn't. So it was a good way to cash out with my cards all there,
Yeah, the house normally wins with fast road bikes, and not my personal experience, but from what I see, I mean, a lot of bang for your buck with a fast road bike, but not a lot of protection for the rider. So
not at all.
You just mentioned there building your next car. So I'm interested. You've got some skills which we're going to dive into in a pretty diverse range of areas in the automotive scene. That's one of the reasons we wanted to chat to you. I'm interested to sort of know how you started building up your own personal skills and working on your cars, obviously, as well as the wiring, which we'll talk about a little bit further on. But yeah, how did that all start? Because a lot of people will own cars with never actually working on them themselves.
Yeah, so I could say that, I mean, I don't want to like toot my own horn, but I think some people are obviously born with like a natural understanding of how things can go together. And, when I was young, even building like RC cars where my friends were getting into those things and their dads were helping them, I was just forced to do it on my own. So my grandmother always said, oh, you can always tell an American versus someone from Europe because Americans don't read, like directions. And I was young when she told me that, and it stuck with me because I was like, oh, well, I can just read these directions and build this RC car because the directions come with it. So, if you can read, you could probably assemble it. And I was probably 11 or 12 years old when I did that. And from then on, I just stuck to reading the directions. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of how things can go together just by looking at them. And then also, you got to read the directions because they'll give you hints and tips of how things go together, obviously. And, most parts are given with directions.
That way you don't end up with a bunch of spare parts left over at the end of a project, correct?
Right. Very important most of the time.
That gets you so far, but of course, when it comes to starting to modify vehicles, it's a very personal journey depending on what you're doing. And last time I checked, building a competitive drift car out of an FD RX-7 doesn't come with an instruction manual from Tamiya. So there's a level to this, and then obviously at some point you've got to go in your own sort of take your own path. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so that was I would like to call like my introduction to car forums. Back in the day, that was everything, is these forums of these enthusiasts who did things on their own. And, when the Japanese imports came onto the scene, I think in the US, there wasn't a broad knowledge base. So most of it was like people trying things and this and that online. And, luckily there were like build threads. That was like today's YouTube videos, but people just typed out what they did, what tools they needed. So I would just eat up every bit of these build threads and then cross-reference them with like what I would think could be a better outcome. And then I would do it because I couldn't afford to, for instance, have someone wire up fuel pumps for me or, set, my own alignment or, the drive shaft angle or a million of these things that just didn't have a cut and dry, like this is how you do it. Like maybe someone did a build and had like a single turbo installed, but they bought this kit. And I was like, okay, well that kit looks cool, but it doesn't prioritize the wastegate, venting. So like I wanted to make sure that I prioritize the wastegate to be able to have like the highest efficiency. So then I contact someone who could build this for me and then like build it the way that I want. But then like that wouldn't work out. So then I ended up going to a place, he'd build it, and then I'd be like, okay, well, right here, you need to put the wastegate. He's like, oh, are you sure? And I'm like, dude, positive. then I'd take it home, mock it up. If it all went good, then take it back and he'd finish it off, type of thing.
Sure. So essentially self-taught maybe from the instruction manuals from others. And I mean, I just want to sort of point out here that the internet is just an amazing resource, and within reason, just about anything that you want to do on a car, there's going to be someone else who's probably sort of walked that path before you. So there's a lot that can be gained just with that research. I think we've moved on from build threads. Unfortunately, I kind of grew up in that build thread era as well. And I mean, I always used to love sort of absorbing all of that knowledge from, particularly, I was in the Evo drag racing scene, which was really vibrant in the US. So just following, what others were doing on the different forums. And then you absorb their ideas. And exactly like you say, you sort of see someone do something, you're like, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. But what if we just did this little bit over here as well? And you can sort of tweak it and improve without actually having to go through and do all of those iterations yourself. So really powerful way of sort of improving your knowledge base and your skills. Getting specifically into drifting. So how did you evolve? Obviously, we've talked about the street bike and sort of canyon carving. You obviously had a bit of a passion for riding a bike fast, which I'm guessing translated into driving a car fast. But I see a very separate path in terms of those who get into competitive drifting versus those who are into road racing, circuit racing, etc.
As a young kid, I was always wanting to challenge myself, and I was into like competitive soccer, baseball. I love sports, being put up against the next person to test like my personal skill. But this was different and more challenging because not only did I have to show up and perform, I had to build the vehicle to get there. So it was like two types of competition. Like, can you master building this machine, which I love building things, and then can you master or beat yourself and show up to compete and do well, and get that skill set better and above the next guy. So for me, that was it. Like, it was like two things that I loved put together, and I moved from wanting to build this car for like time attack and everything to drifting because I actually went to an open class event out here at Willow Springs International Raceway in Lancaster, California. And man, I just got the cold shoulder from a lot of the guys. I mean, obviously a young kid with an FD RX-7 shows up and, obviously it looks like a street car and I have no idea what I'm doing. So they probably just saw me as like some kid they didn't want to waste time with. But my buddy was like, dude, you got to come to this drift event. And I show up to that thing, and all of a sudden, I met this guy named Martin Wench, and he's like, oh, dude, you got an RX-7 too. Well, I've got a turbo too. You want to, go for a ride along? And I was like, yeah. And he put me in the car, and it was game over. I was like, this is it. Build this car to do the same thing that I got to ride in the passenger seat of, and I'm going to build like the baddest FDRX7 that I can. And then I'm going to enter those competitions that those other guys are doing and do my best. So it was always like a challenge versus myself.
Choice of car is interesting. I mean, I've got a soft spot for the FD RX-7 and always have. Just one of those classic sort of Japanese, supercars, I guess. Maybe supercars not quite the right term. Anyway, obviously the engine is the key here, the 13B rotary, and arguably maybe not known for its reliability, and I don't want to sort of knock it here, but there's more than their fair share of modified rotary turbo engines meet their demise with apex seals exiting the exhaust and probably taking the turbocharger out with them. So can you start by sort of saying what was the impetus behind the FD as your platform of choice?
Oh man,
or did you sort of fall into that?
Yeah, so I could say it was fate, to be honest. I remember riding in I was on a family beach day down in Venice, and my sister was driving, and I looked to the right past this intersection and turns this black, beautiful car, and I'm like staring at this car, and I'm like, oh my God, what is that? And I asked my sister, I was like, hey, Nicole, what is that? And she's like, oh, that's an RX-7. And then I just remember that badge on the back of the car, you know? And I was like, oh, how could something be so cool, you know? And that just stuck with me, you know, from the accident with my GSR, the Integra Turbo. I got I think it was 17 or 18 grand. And my dad was like, don't you spend all that on a car. And I spent every last bit of it on an FD RX-7.
Thanks for the free tip, Dad.
Yeah, thanks, Dad. And it was everything about the RX-7, not only the shape, the beauty, the way that it looked, the motor, you know, everything about it's different. And I wouldn't necessarily call myself like a normal type of person. I'm kind of like hyper fixated on these certain aspects of life that, you know, are uniquely different. You know, I like certain types of challenges. When someone says, oh, you know, that can't be done, I'm like, maybe it can. Maybe they just haven't found the right way, type of thing. So that's why I chose FD RX-7.
Okay. I mean, definitely the Rotary is a pretty good way to set yourself apart from a sea of other piston engines. So yes, it's a good way to stand out, but also present some challenges. And again, I've mentioned the reliability problems. Just interested if you could maybe start by giving us a bit of a high level rundown on the spec of the engine that you're running currently.
Yeah, so my motor, it's stock internals, S6, which is like 93 to 95 in the US, or 99 all the way up to, you know, the Japanese spec. FD RX-7 internals, most of the modifications are outside of the actual block, aside from I was using PTS apex seals,
okay,
stock side seals, Atkins solid corner seals, which have worked out, but I will say that I lost some starting compression. Other than that, the motor internally is fairly stock. I have boosted up my oil pressure quite a bit. It's right over 1700 RPM at idle. If I touch the throttle, it's peaked out at 150 PSI. Oil pressure is sky high. And I really think that mixed with a good oil is probably why it lives so long.
Oh, let's talk about some of the sort of more common failure points of the 13B and what needs to be addressed, sort of irrespective of what you're using it for, drifting, just a fast street car or road race application. You know, what needs to be addressed for reliability? For reliability, I truly believe that your tune and an overabundance of fuel is probably going to help you. I think people, when they try to run them a little bit too lean, you know, like your EGTs are harder you have a smaller window or margin of error with them, because once those get too hot and there's not enough fuel, I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster, right? Yeah. I think one of the things that you just really nailed it, in my opinion, that the tune-up. I think that is probably the main killer of rotary engines, and a lot of it comes as well. It is a unique engine, as we've already alluded to, and for that reason you've got a lot of rotary specialist tuners, and that's all they do, and obviously those guys and girls know the engines inside and out, and most of them are probably tuning up pretty good work. Then you've got a lot of tuners that have come from a piston engine background, and where I see problems there is they try and apply the same tuning strategy that they use on a piston engine to a rotary. So they chase fueling, they chase timing in particular, and that is definitely not the way to tune a rotary engine. I mean, particularly if we talk about detonation for a moment, knock. At modest power levels, you know, you can tune a piston engine and encounter some light detonation and stop, pull some timing back out, and you're good to go. And particularly if you're talking about a standard 13B with stock seals, stock apex seals, almost any level of detonation is just instant death. So you want to leave a really healthy safety margin with your timing. In saying that, though, rotaries don't tend to see the same significant gains as you start stepping up the timing as well. So you can kind of leave a bit of meat on the bone, so to speak, a little bit of safety margin there, and you're not giving away a huge amount of power. So that's the sort of timing side of things. And then, when we talk about the fueling, with the rotary engine, the part it's hard to deal with if you're a tuner is that when you lean them out, they'll make a good increase in power.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not going to last well in a sort of a high output mode on a racetrack. So again, you've got to kind of re sort of calibrate your targets for fueling and ignition. And I know that's something that's a bit of a struggle. Do you sort of agree with those aspects?
No, absolutely. I do. One thing I will say is I think people don't pre-mix enough in like track cars. I think we ran into this issue last time. I said I was like 2-1, right? And you're like, what the hell? And I'm like,
we got some heated debate on we're referencing here a YouTube interview that we did at SEMA, I think it was a few years back, and you sort of rolled off the tongue 2-1, and I was sort of left at the time thinking, what? And of course, because I didn't clarify, we ended up with a lot of people in the comments going, what? So 2-1, tell us what that actually means.
2 ounces per gallon on the mix. And I'm using Redline alcohol premix. All my fluids are Redline. Shameless sponsor plug. But this stuff works. I think like in a performance or at least a track car, you need to lubricate, well, especially when you're using like ethanol, right? It's like a detergent. It's just cleaning everything. You pull a motor apart and it just looks brand new inside. But that also needs to be taken into account. Like, is it getting enough lubrication? Especially if you're like deleting like the OMP, which, people are like, oh, did you delete it? I'm like, yeah, I did, but you probably shouldn't. A good working OMP does a really good job. There's a reason why.
Let's just talk about that for those who aren't sort of too up to speed with rotary. So OMP, you're talking about the oil metering pump. So just tell us what that does in the stock Mazda form.
So OEM, a Mazda motor comes with the OMP oil metering pump, and that just injects extra oil into the rotor housings to help lubricate, like the contact surface of the apex seals on the inside of the rotor housing.
And that's actually just injecting oil straight from the sump. So inevitably, because of this, there will be some oil consumption with any rotary engine. Yes.
And, a lot of people, I don't know why, but most I just change my oil after every time I go out pretty much. But with the 2-stroke, you get a lot of oil dilution as well. So you could see it as maybe not a linear decrease in efficiency, but it definitely ramps up on you. So if you're going 3-4 track days without changing your oil and you're not premixing and you're still expecting that oil to be doing its job, it's being injected, but it's diluted. Is it really doing what it should be doing, or is it injecting a bunch of diluted oil into the housings, which are now causing more friction? And then you start getting those chatter marks on the rotor housings if you've seen those from lack of lubrication. So long story short, I would say premix it until it starts smoking. And then especially if you're going out like a track day, and just keep it there. I mean, I do 2-1, and I have been doing that for, 2 ounces per gallon, just so you don't get caught with that again. For the past 3-4 years, everything looks great in there. And, that's my personal experience.
Yeah, it's a good point to make that I've tuned a lot of rotary engines, and I deal with a lot of rotary engine builders here in New Zealand. And the interesting thing is, everyone has their own set view on this is the magic number for premix. And I mean, I do what the engine builder requests. Obviously, that way, if something goes wrong, you can't get blamed. But it is interesting that there is this quite wide variation. Now, you just said, sort of to the point where it's smoking, and actually, let's just come back one step. We've talked about the OMP, the oil metering pump, in the OE format, and that injects oil essentially in one central location in the rotor housing. And often in the aftermarket, we go away from that oil metering pump. I think at least originally one of the reasons why people ditched the oil metering pump was the aftermarket ECUs that we had access to back in the earlier days didn't have the capability of actually running the metering pump and replicating the way Mazda do it. That's fine. These days, that's really not an issue, but still, I think there's this ingrained, if I'm building a performance rotary, well, premix is the way. But I feel there's some advantages with premix as well, in that because you're basically getting a homogeneous air fuel mix, which obviously has that lubricating oil mixed in with it. I kind of feel it's got to do a better job of getting all around the rotor housing and the rotor and lubricating the parts versus just injecting in one single location. Is my read on that correct? Do you agree with that?
No, I mean, absolutely. Just like the mechanical mind in me sees like this tiny hole in the top of the rotor housing. And then as soon as it, a seal sweeps by, I mean, the seal is flat. So it's obviously not like V-shaped. So it's not going to spread the same way you'd think. I mean, you take a piece of butter and you slam it on something, you kind of got to work at it to get it to reach the edges, right? So there's something there. And then obviously with new injectors, you've got much better spray patterns. You put some premix into the fuel system and it's being injected the same way fuel is, you're definitely going to have like a much better mix and overall spread of that lubrication, I'd think.
One thing I will point out, just from a tuning perspective, that's easy to overlook, is that if you are running premix, one of the things you really do want to stay away from, though, is overrun fuel cut. Which is, for those who aren't aware, simply when we're at high RPM completely off the throttle, the injectors are usually completely disabled, so zero injections occurring, and this is done for emissions and economy. It's a OE sort of strategy that most aftermarket ECUs offer. However, of course, if you're relying on injecting fuel and oil for lubrication through the injectors, that's definitely not something you want to do. Last thing you want is high RPM with an instantaneous loss of lubrication to the internal parts. So just a component that I know a lot of people don't really consider when they are tuning. Now, coming back to that other statement you made about basically premix until it starts smoking. So, in a piston engine application, one of the things we try and avoid at all costs is basically ingesting any blow-by gases which contain oil back into the intake charge, because the oil vapor essentially has the effect of lowering the overall octane of your air fuel charge, making the engine therefore more prone to knock. We've already talked about rotary engines and knock are not good friends. So is this an issue if we go too rich with the premix, or do we have other problems before we ever get to a situation where the premix is actually creating a condition of knock?
Yeah. So I've like gone more with my premixing. Honestly, I don't want to say that I've done more than maybe like a hair over 2 ounces per, but like in the track shuffle or, I've definitely been like, well, that looks about 2, and started gooping this stuff in there. So I wouldn't say that you should. Definitely, I don't want to blow up anyone's motor. They're in there, adding 4 and 5 ounces per gallon. That's just a recipe for disaster within reason, right? So I'm sure you could probably run into that, but I think that it would be, there's different fuels, right? You got like gasoline versus ethanol. And obviously with ethanol, you're going to need a little bit more lubrication with it, but I wouldn't want to steer anyone in the wrong direction with this.
Ultimately, what we'd probably have to say here is consult with your engine builder. This is just a discussion of what you've found to work. So we probably need to just add that little caveat in there. But I think the reason I want to talk about this is there is a lot of debate about it and just understanding the implications either way. But as you've found for your own purposes, the rich premix has helped with engine reliability. And while you've been talking there, because I don't work in ounces and I don't work in gallons, but I just did a quick conversion here in New Zealand, and I think this is probably pretty common across sort of the metric parts of the world. For premix, we sort of work in mils per 20 litres, or at least that's what I've always done. So if my math worked out correctly, you're 2 ounces per gallon. That works out to around about 315 mils per 20 litres. Again, I haven't fact checked that, but that's definitely, that is quite rich compared to what I'd be used to running. So just wanted to put that out there as well.
Could I run back to your overrun fuel cut?
Yes, absolutely.
Another positive on that is trying to cool our cylinder or our overall combustion cycle as much as possible between those hits. So by adding fuel there, it really doesn't do anything but good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I should have probably touched on that. I mean, that's why it's pretty common. The rotary engine's great for sort of laying down a trail of flames on overrun, and that is because we're running them richer, purposely injecting additional fuel when the driver's completely off throttle to help cool down that combustion charge rotor housing temperature. Because again, I mean, all things being equal, if we compare a 13B to a conventional maybe 2-litre 4-cylinder engine turbocharged and both making the same power, the rotary, and again, I don't want to get offside with the rotary enthusiasts, sadly, it's pretty well known fact that they are a little bit less efficient, so that sort of manifests itself in additional heat, and the EGTs on a rotary are significantly higher than a comparable 4-cylinder turbo engine. So controlling that with our air fuel ratio, and again the overall overrun fuel is really important. Now, we've sort of touched briefly on the fact that the internals in your engine are standard, or for the most part standard. There's a couple of things that I know are sort of common modifications. One of them is clearancing or side clearancing the rotors. There's also the choice of seals, which is always a big debate in the rotary world. There's stud kits, there's doweling. So can you talk to us through some of those options? Let's leave the apex seals for a separate conversation, because I'll dive into that. Cool. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on where these technologies, or where these modifications, I should say, are required? What sort of power level or RPM are they required at, and what, if any, are you using?
Cool. This could get pretty depthy, but I love it. So we hit a few flags, if you could say, during like the development of my current package. One was the motor was actually twisting, which is not good. And then, so we ended up doweling the motor and pinning it. And, for those who don't understand what that is, it's just reinforcing, I guess, your keyways, right? Making it solid. And then moving away from the OEM oil pan and getting a billet unit, which obviously helped strengthen the overall clamp, right? Sure. Of plates versus housings. And, that would be about it in terms of structural rigidity, on the mechanical, irons and aluminum housings. We do use a slightly larger stud kit. It was just off the shelf stuff. There's a bunch that you can choose from. On my newest motor, which I would hate to move into that already, but I'm going with the 1/2-inch ones. But on this, it's just oversized. They fit into the OEM, ports or.
So the oversize requires some pretty precision machining, so that everything's actually going to assemble nicely. And I mean, again, we don't have the benefit here, unfortunately, of photos, but basically what Aaron's talking about here is we're trying to eliminate the twisting reaction between the rotor housings and the irons when the engine is under power, under load, and that sort of movement can cause a sort of huge number of separate issues. So trying to just basically improve that structural rigidity and integrity of the engine. Now, let's move on to the internal. So unlike, I don't really know why this is the situation. Maybe it's just because the parts generally, when they're looked after and tuned properly, don't present issues. But unlike a piston engine where we have hundreds of manufacturers making aftermarket pistons, rods, etc., rotaries is not like that. You're dealing with factory Mazda rotors. But again, I talked about the clearancing. Is that something that you're doing on yours, or is it not necessary?
No, it definitely is, but it's not anything that's it's not like special, right? We actually haven't side clearanced the rotors. And I think that's because, I've got my studs and the thing's pinned, and I've got my, the motor's not going to twist now. So you're not seeing as much movement as possible. Internally, only other thing I could think of is, you smash your oil pressure regulator, so it just skyrockets your oil pressure to help from the E-shaft from moving just that little bit up front. Don't crank down your front crank belt or the alternator accessory belt too much, because it actually will pull it to one side, which you can tell by the rear bearing. You'll see it's stereotypical. You'll see if you pull apart most rotaries in stock form, you'll see bearing material missing from one corner, which is I think 6 o'clock. It's in the same spot on pretty much every motor, and usually that's just from that action of the E-shaft moving over. And then the only other thing would be blocking off an oil passage from the OEM pedestal to the front iron, and then having a direct feed to make sure that front bearing is getting good oil. And then if you do crack something, it doesn't shoot all over the place, because there's some castings that are pretty thin from the factory, at least on a S6 motor.
Okay. Now, the apex seals seem to be, as I mentioned, an area where there's no real clear path forward in terms of what the best option is, at least from my experience as well. What we quite often see is the apex seals that prove to be just about indestructible are exactly that. But the downside is that they become very abrasive on the rotor housing. So you end up with a lot of wear on the housings and hence lose compression, needing a freshen up relatively quickly. So there's sort of a balancing act here between, obviously we don't want an apex seal that's going to break, although a lot of that, again, as I mentioned, comes down to getting the tune-up right, keeping away from knock, keeping the engine happy with a nice, safe air-fuel ratio. But aside from that, at a certain power level, we kind of get beyond what Mazda apex seals can withstand. So can you talk to us maybe about some of the options out there and what you've settled on and why?
Yeah, so I will be 100% honest here. I've seen so many different apex seals used these days, and I've seen people have success stories with even stock OEM 2mm seals that I don't necessarily think that it's a super big secret. I think that it's just there's people trying to recycle parts too much. And, they'll end on, oh, this apex seal failed, it's crap, yada, yada, when realistically 90% of their motor has 150,000 miles on it, and the seal can only do so much. Maybe they didn't clean out their rotor grooves for their seals, and it's pinching the one seal, or they're reusing the springs, or stuff like that. Like the side seal's caught, the port's too big, grabs the side seal, and it tears up, and then the apex seal breaks, and now they're blaming it on this brand of seal. I just can't stand how much negativity there is in that. I mean, there are definitely seals where I'm like, man, that thing functioned great. But then I look at my motor and I've addressed every other issue. And in my personal experience, I'll lose side seal spring compression before ever having to worry about a seal failing,
Okay.
And that's just from abuse. That's just from, leaving the line when the car is, 220 degrees Fahrenheit, and then coming off and it's like 250, 260 because there's no airflow. It's 115 degrees outside and you're sitting on this tarmac that's 125, 130. The fans are just trying to do what they can. The water pump doesn't turn off because it's that hot ambient outside. And I think there's definitely good seals. Power seals make good seals. Mazda from the factory makes great seals. I will say on my newest motor, I'm still using a 2mm seal. I think that things have gotten so good with ancillary parts that you can construct the motor and not have to put that additional weight and do the additional machining required to put extra strength in a seal, because you can reinforce other aspects of the motor that will prevent you from having to, I don't want to say put a Band-Aid on it, but in the past you would do that because you're worried about the seal going. Yeah.
Okay. So let's just stop there. And there's a couple of things I wanted to sort of dive back into and unpack. And I think what you've just kind of alluded to, it warrants some further expansion, is that I think a lot of the bad reputation that the rotary engine unfortunately has gotten is from two separate areas. One is poor tunes, which we've already touched on, but the other is because, rightly or wrongly, the rotary engine is kind of seen as a much simpler engine compared to a piston engine. There's less moving parts. So I think a lot of enthusiasts kind of are quite happy to have a crack and build their own engine, and pretty much exactly what you said, slapping together a whole bunch of used parts in the back shed, maybe without a full comprehension of what they're doing, proper cleaning, proper clearancing, and of course the results are exactly what you expect, and then couple that with a poor tune and it's game over. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. But you've mentioned 2mm seals there, so we're talking about the width there of the apex seal. So another common modification that is made is to machine the rotors themselves to take a 3mm wide apex seal. So the aim or the intention there is wider, obviously stronger. That's kind of the backstory as to why that's done.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and additional, like you said, wider, stronger. Unfortunately, adds weight as well. And when you're spinning something to a higher RPM, that could be an issue unless you're using like a ceramic seal, but then you're walking on the knife's edge there if you're pushing it too much. NA, like naturally aspirated, would be awesome to run like a 3mm seal. But then again, things have gotten so good to where I don't see the need to do that anymore. You could run a 2mm seal on an NA motor without having to worry about it going, unless you're spinning it to 11 or 12.
Well, you just mentioned ceramic apex seals, and I just want to be super clear here. I am definitely not a rotary engine builder. I've tuned hundreds of them over the years. I've dealt with the engine builders. I've got a reasonable understanding of what goes into building these engines and the options available. But just wanted to clear that up before someone jumps down my throat on this. But the ceramic apex seals, so from what I can understand and deduce, like the nice aspect of the ceramic apex seal is very low friction, low wear, and doesn't seem to do any damage to the rotor housing. So that's nice. You get a nice long life engine. But again, from my basic understanding is these ceramic seals, absolutely zero tolerance of any tune-up issues. You get the slightest hint of detonation and it's going to shatter. And then, unlike the factory seals breaking, when those ceramics break, they destroy the entire engine. They take everything with it, correct?
Yeah, it's like shrapnel pretty much, like micro dust goes everywhere, and you might as well just throw everything away because good luck trying to get all that stuff out,
Yeah, so they work pretty well if you've got a dialed in, or they are a good option, I should say, for a naturally aspirated engine where the tune's really dialed in and it's on point. A bit of a recipe for disaster if you wanted to try that route on a turbo engine.
Yeah, I've got buddies actually who will do full builds with steel seals, and then once everything's 100% dialed, pull the motor apart, put the ceramics back in there, make sure everything's good, maybe put a little bit more on the table in terms of safety, and call it a day. Just because they'll get that longevity out of the seal that weighs less, doesn't get as hot as quickly,
Yeah, I've heard exactly the same. All right, and one of the problems you just mentioned, heat there, the steel seals, regardless of the material, we end up with a problem with them actually bowing, and that's where the rotary engine sort of starts to lose compression. And usually one of the first hints that something's not quite right with a rotary engine is that they are very hard to start, correct?
Yes, yeah. Once you start getting that hard starting issue, like it's just the telltale sign, hey, you're starting to lose compression. Under boost, they're beautiful. They'll still run exactly the same, but hard starting,
Yeah, the nice thing with the way the rotary engine works is you've got these bowed apex seals that maybe, and it's only doesn't need to be much of a bow to affect that compression at cranking speed, sort of 200 to 300 RPM. Of course, with the forces involved at high RPM, those apex seals are kind of forced out into the rotor housing. So some of that lost compression becomes less of a significant issue at higher RPM. But of course, to get to 7,000 or 8,000 RPM, you still have to get the engine to start in the first place. Let's move on, and we'll talk about porting, because again, obviously you can't really talk about rotary engines without talking about port options. There's extend ports, bridge ports, peripheral ports, J ports. And the porting option can have a massive impact on the power band and the airflow and performance of the rotary engine. Not all porting options are suited to all applications, though, and if we look at the baddest option for a naturally aspirated is the peripheral port, but requires a very, very high RPM in order to actually make that work, and also requires a very free-flowing and hence loud exhaust system. Can you talk us through what your thoughts are on what suits a drift application turbocharged rotary engine?
Yeah. Personally, my car has a semi-peripheral port mixed with a pretty general or slightly larger street port. And we landed that option just because we're trying to get the most efficient setup. Before, just without the semi-peripheral port, which, to explain what that is just two additional holes on the rotor housing themselves. So, factory, it came as a 4-port. So with the semi-peripheral, you're adding 2 additional ones. So it'd be a 6-port. And you're adding those 2 onto the rotor housing, so it's a direct line into the combustion chamber versus a hard 90. But I'd say that with drift, there's two ways to look at it. Like, do you want to spend some money, to have that extra air? Because the more, same with any motor, the more fuel and air you can fit into there, the more power you can make, right? Or do you want to just crank the boost up on like a stock port? Because you could have like a factory built Mazda motor, a reman motor, and you put 20 pounds of boost in it, and it's going to blow the tires off. It'll make 450, 500 fairly easily, and you're going to get that torque. Once you start adding like a peripheral port, you're going to lose torque in places. It's hard to explain because people are like, oh, well, like makes less torque. But people don't understand the acceleration with like a turbo car versus like a car that makes like instant torque. So, back to porting, sorry to get off subject, but I truly feel that if you want to spend money and you port the thing, it's going to be badass. It might not suit your needs, but if you just take a reman motor and you shove a bunch of boost into it, it's going to make power as well. It might not have that same brap, or that sound, but you can also run into issues and you can lose momentum in your project because, it's not as straightforward as people think.
The point, I guess, that's worth making here is it totally is going to depend on your desired outcome. And you're absolutely right. Yes, put 20 psi of boost into a stock port engine, it's still going to make good numbers. But when you start getting into competitive drifting where the numbers continue to climb, you sort of get to a point where essentially the stock porting just won't support more airflow. And if you want to go to that next step, then a porting option becomes sort of essential really to take that next step. The semi-PP, quite a bit of work involved in that compared to the likes of an extend port or bridge port though, given that you're not only modifying the irons, you're also actually adding that peripheral port through the rotor housing, plus that requires a special inlet manifold to suit. Are these now available off the shelf, the semi-PP inlet manifolds?
Yeah, you can get them. I think there's a company in Australia that does them. Man, I would hate to get this wrong. If it's Extreme Rotaries or South Coast Rotary, sells them.
Sure.
It's like a cast version of what Excessive used to sell. I'm not sure. I think Excessive still in manufacturing in the USA still sells cast versions of this lower intake manifold. But they're great. They're really good. Moving from that versus my old custom lower intake manifold, I picked up, I think it was like 40 wheel horsepower. And I think it's just because they did a better job merging those collectors and making things a little bit more efficient. But one thing I really wanted to talk about, sorry to go slightly off subject, was turbo choice when you're starting to port motors. Because, rotary is very different than like your piston variants and they're less efficient. But a lot of the times you get into a situation where that works against you and your turbo choice is very limited because you're either going to make a ton of power at the top of the rev range or you're going to want to like max out a turbo and then you're going to start to overspin the thing and create all sorts of heat. And then why spin the rotor, up to 10 grand type of thing.
Sure.
So it is a little bit of a process to dial in what you're using on the AR, the turbine side of the turbo versus, your comp side, which is why you see like these massive turbos on these 2 or 3 rotor drag cars. And then people see that and then they put like this massive GT45 on their street car 2 rotor and they're like, oh yeah, it made 600. But then I'm like, yeah, but you look at the graph and, you've got 600 for 200 RPM at the top.
Yeah, I think that's a very common turbo sizing mistake is but bigger is not always better. You've touched on a really interesting point that I did want to raise, though, is that all things being equal, if we're looking at building a 13B to make 600 horsepower, or your stereotypical 2-litre 4-cylinder engine to make the same power levels, the turbo sizing, particularly in the exhaust or turbine side, the hot side, you're going to be significantly larger on the rotary application compared to the piston application, correct?
Absolutely. And yet, that's like, people look at my motor and like, man, that turbo is massive. And I'm like, dude, this is nothing compared to like what a lot of the drag guys are using. On a Borg-Warner, it's an 8474 with a 1.05 exhaust housing. I guess that's considered like a 70 mil, like right under, right? The 69, 70.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, but we spin my motor to, it's 9850 is my hard cut, and going from the 8374, which is like the version 1 of that series of turbo, to the 8474, just that single millimeter made up all the difference in the world. And where it was falling off around like 89 to 95, now it just carries all the way up.
I just fact checked myself, and it is a 68 millimeter compressor on that 8474. We've got the exact same turbocharger on our in-house FD RX-7, albeit with a street engine, and it actually blew my mind. It's probably more turbo than we need for a stock engine. It's easily capable of destroying that engine if I wind the boost up. But what I blew my mind with it is that I don't have a dyno sheet obviously in front of me. I think we ran it to 15 PSI. It makes 420 wheel horsepower, and I think we had it all in full boost by, I want to say 3,500 RPM.
Oh, yeah.
It's so insanely responsive. And we're talking about a turbocharger where we're just breathing on it at the moment. That turbo is not in its sweet spot at 15 PSI of boost. So, I can't wait for a build engine to be able to lean on it. Now, in terms of, you said you're running yours to 9,800. With that semi-PP, we talked briefly about how that moves around the torque curve, and I guess it's a good comparison or analogy is that it's kind of like cams for a piston engine. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to make power up at 9,500, 10,000 RPM, you're going to give away some bottom end response. And that kind of is pretty easy to get your head around. What sort of usable RPM range have you got with that combination with the 8474 and the semi-PP?
Yeah, so I hate to brag about this, but again, you got to remember it's like 7 or 8 years of me dialing in this specific setup. Like getting it better and better and better and better and better, doing everything I can, including gearing, to make sure that I was getting the largest power band out of that RPM range as possible. So truthfully, I would say, my car idles at 19 to 2100 RPM. So that's one thing people forget. They're like, oh, well, if your car idles at 800 or 900, but you're seeing boost at 3800, they're like, oh, well, that's not so good. But realistically, you've only got like 1,000 RPM or 16 or 1700 RPM of dead time before you get there. Which in drifting, you leave the line and you're revving it up anyways, and you just learn to drive the car with the clutch. You're slipping the clutch constantly to make sure that the boost is right where you want it, so that you can control what gets to the ground. And then obviously anything over $4,000 up to 9,800 is just playtime. So I would say a very large power band, which is overlooked. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on that. If you go with a turbo that's too big, you're not going to get that. Yeah,
absolutely. You mentioned gear ratios there, which is another really important point. Obviously it's ideal if we can have a nice wide power band. And if you're talking sort of 4 through to close to 10,000 RPM, you've got 6,000 RPM to play with. Obviously, if we compare that to a dyno sheet, it's probably making its peak power right up in the top end of that range. So, you wouldn't necessarily want to drop it down to 4,000. But, in terms of the gearing, that's a consideration. What's the gearbox that you're actually using?
Yeah, so I'm using an HGT, it's New Zealand made, sequential 5-speed, which on my new build will be a 4-speed because, I'll be going with the quick change rear end, which now kind of eliminates the need to make up that gap with the transmission, right? I can kind of gear the car overall for like each track.
And it's something we see quite a lot with drift applications is, less gears. And I'm guessing as well, once you're actually out of first gear and off the line with a 4-speed gearbox, am I right in saying you're probably predominantly between third and fourth, or maybe at the worst down to second?
Yeah. Well, some tracks you would probably get into second. Like if there's a hairpin, towards like Long Beach, there's a pretty slow hairpin, which you'd come in maybe at like 45 and exit maybe doing 25, the gearing is pretty much everything in terms of getting all that usable power, because there's no sense in having like this giant, like a 3.5 or a 3.9 ring gear and then like a 6-speed transmission, and your top speed of the track is 90 mile an hour. You're going to be shifting so much. You're trying to eliminate the busy work of your hands so that you can legitimately keep your hands on the wheel and potentially the handbrake and just shift less, Well, that's my school of thought, at least.
I mean, it makes sense as well. Given that you're running that HGT dog change sequential gearbox, one of the things we quite often see is a strain gauge gear knob, allowing the engine or the car to be shifted without the driver lifting off the throttle. And without getting too deep into the background, what's going on, that just requires a momentary torque interrupt, be it a fuel cut, ignition cut, or both, in order to disrupt the engine torque and allow the dogs to disengage to get into the next gear. Advantage being the shifts are very quick, and because you're still at full throttle, the turbo doesn't tend to fall off boost. However, as I mentioned, it does require that torque interrupt, which can in and of itself be problematic with rotary engines. So is this something you're using, or are you still manually lifting on the shifts?
Yeah, so it's technically, last time I checked, it's illegal in Formula Drift.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think you're allowed to do that anymore. When I was crewing for Mad Mike, this must have been in 2000, I don't know. That was 15, 16, or 17. It was allowed. And it got to a point where it was inconsistent enough for him to not feel as comfortable as he should driving it, so he stopped using it.
Okay.
And again, that could be just time dialing it in, which a lot of these cars don't have years of that work into. I mean, the guys at the top, all their stuff is dialed. And not saying Mike's wasn't, but it was a brand new car that first year. So going into a 115 mile an hour initiation in Seattle, and your foot's flat, do you want to try, or should you just lift? It's like,
Yeah, in terms of shifting, even without sort of any electronic intervention, it's not like a conventional H-pattern style synchromesh gearbox, which requires the clutch for upshifts and downshifts. So are you can, of course, use the clutch. My question is here, how are you doing those upshifts then? Because you don't necessarily need to use the clutch, but you can just lift off the throttle sufficiently to, again, provide that torque interrupt. Is that kind of your technique?
Absolutely that, but I would say that's only up to initiation. Everything else is slippage. So I slipped the clutch so much on this car, and I think it is because obviously the lack of displacement equates to a lack of torque. So if I can just keep that thing in boost, then I can determine what makes it to the ground. Versus if I didn't slip the clutch, I would always have to be in the perfect RPM range, which would be too much work to figure out, and I would just get gapped all the time, or the car would straighten up. So yeah, it's a balancing act, but yeah, legit going up to initiation, I just lift off the throttle, and I've gotten pretty good at it. You can hear it pretty good in some of the videos where it almost sounds like it is a flat shift type of thing.
Yeah, well, the thing that is important to mention is you don't need to back completely out of the throttle, and the usual technique I've used on sequential gearboxes like that with no shift cut or interrupt is you sort of, when you're coming up to the shift, you sort of start applying a bit of force on the lever, and while you're under full power, no amount of force is going to pull that out of gear. It's just impossible. But
Right.
you apply force on the lever, and then just a very brief momentary lift out to maybe 50 or 60% throttle generally is enough to just allow that to snick out of that gear and into the next, and you're away. And I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, obviously drifting quite unique in terms of the clutch usage, which we obviously don't see in forms of road racing. So yeah, just glad that you brought that up. You mentioned the quick change rear end, the Winters quick change, which has kind of become the go-to option for just about any professional drift car. So that just allows you to change the overall gearing to get that force speed that you're going to, make those gears second, third, and fourth usable, so you're not kind of topping out fourth gear and sitting on the limiter at faster tracks. That's sort of the scenario you're going with there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for each track, at least on the pro teams that I've been on, we pretty much gear the car for a specific wheel speed based on previous year, which is crazy because every year it changes just because these cars are getting more like faster and faster. And, I guess acceleration has become like just insane, with 8 to 12 PSI in the tires on a 315 or a 295. I think the game has really gone in a different direction, and it's closer to like a drag type of setup. But then when it comes to suspension, you're not necessarily, I don't want to say relying on your dampening, but, there's like a new game where you're kind of relying on, I guess, the spring rate in the tires as well, along with the bump stops to pull traction out of the cars, which really kind of just flies over a lot of people's heads. I mean, you can see it. If you're watching the fast cars out there, you'd be blown away that versus like the lower half of the bracket or even the middle half of the bracket, and how quickly some of these cars are going versus some of the other ones.
We had an interview on the podcast with Stefan Papadakis a while back, and for those who are interested in drifting, I definitely recommend checking that out. But just without sort of going over the whole conversation again, I think a lot of people sort of assume that drifting's all about generating slip and wheel spin, because we see these cars going sideways with huge plumes of smoke coming off both rear wheels. But they're actually, the drive as the power levels have gone up has really been towards improving the grip, particularly in that run down to the initiation, because you're either a lead car or you're a chase car. So you want to, obviously, if you're the lead car, try and gap your opponent. If you're the chase car, you need to stay tight. So getting traction is actually really, really important, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, another aspect of that is tire wear. The more grip you can put down, the more traction you can put down, the more tire you'll have on your second lap versus, you got tons of wheel speed and you got all this crazy smoke. You go to follow and now you're on bald slicks. You can't keep up. The guy in front of you gaps you. And I mean, it happens a lot where people can't dial in their wear and they, chase on bald tires because they don't know how to get there, or no one's taught them.
There's actually a lot that goes into it that would fly over the head of the casual observer who's just going to a round of drifting to watch.
True.
All right, let's talk. We've kind of touched on it, so let's talk a little bit more about car setup in terms of the FD3S chassis. As obviously that's what you've got, so that's fine. I mean, if you were starting with a clean sheet of paper now, how good is the FD RX-7 as a competitive basis for building a drift car? If you had your time again, would you select something different? What's your opinion on its strengths and weaknesses?
Oh man, it's such a beautiful car. It's a race car chassis. The suspension is set up to go fast. It's got everything that it needs. And then the bane of its existence is that it's old and it's not a very stiff chassis. So, I mean, if you're going to build a race car out of one, you're going to have to fix all those things. And like something like Formula Drift just doesn't allow you to do the things that you would want to do to make that thing rigid enough to be in like a heavy accident without having to, just transfer everything over to another chassis type of thing. So I mean, I love the car. I think that it's super fast. The twitchiness in it is just something that you can use for like an aggressive driving style. You know, other people, pro drivers have driven my car and they're like, man, that thing just accelerates so quickly. You know, it's so much fun to drive. But again, like it's so rare. Like the car right now, I saw one going for like 65 or 70 grand with 80,000 miles on it. It was beautiful, but are you going to turn that into a drift car unless you're going to Pro 1 and you have two of them? You know, it's like, come on. Like, it's just, I would do it again if I could, which I may, because I've got a shell that I picked up for like $900. I don't know, it was probably like 5 or 6 years ago. And it's in great shape, but you can't find those anymore.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the really popular, you know, sort of 90s generation Japanese cars, the sort of hero cars, you know, the prices in the last decade have just gone through the roof, and they're kind of crazy. So I guess you'd be also second guessing whether you want to potentially do some damage and trying to find panels.
Right.
not that easy anymore.
No, I mean, I call them like Japanese muscle cars. You know, that's like, you know, like your American Chevelles and all those things. Like that's Japanese era for muscle cars, like the FD, the Supra, even like the Evos and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was that, the GTRs and probably to a lesser extent the NSX, although those were always kind of
very cool,
a little bit out of my league price-wise anyway.
Same.
In terms of the suspension setup, are you dealing predominantly with off-the-shelf components? Because obviously the FD is a pretty well-supported chassis, albeit the changes necessary for drift are a little bit different to a fast street car or road race. But yeah, these are off-the-shelf components, or is it predominantly custom built?
No, it's off the shelf now. When I was starting, you know, we were cutting knuckles and, you know, having friends weld shorter knuckles together type of thing. But, you know, I've worked with the company Parts Shop Max to develop the limit brake kit, which is what we did our video on at SEMA. There's another company, WiseFab, makes a full kit for it. So you can get off-the-shelf components for it. It just comes down to, are you going to drift a car, you know, a 20-year-old car that is, you know, a shell is going to cost you 15 grand now. So where do you start? How long is your project going to take versus... well, actually, they're all going up, kind of like even a 240 or a coupe's going to cost you 10 grand these days. Like, I don't know. I mean, I love the chassis, but off the shelf parts are still there. Maybe it's just going to be like an inflation thing where if you build a car, you're just going to have a grip of money, you know?
Fair. In terms of the competition with cars that are running these bigger capacity engines, which we've sort of talked about a couple of times, maybe the LS Turbo, 2JZ, etc. Do you feel that you're at a deficit with the capacity disadvantage of the 13B, or is it really not an issue?
I think that at the Pro 2 level, my car would have done great because it was built strong enough to where it could probably take right around 700 wheel, like horsepower, I think, with the addition of nitrous. It made 566 at 21 PSI without nitrous. And it was more efficient than my previous setup. So I could, like every year, the car got a little bit more efficient, you know? I don't think that you need 700 or 800, even in Pro 2. Well, maybe around 650, 700 would probably be the limit if you wanted to be competitive in Pro 2. But you need to have everything else on point. Like you can get away with a car with 650 if you have your gearing on point. You know, I felt like I had my gearing on point. I was taught by like my mentors, Odie, Mad Mike, like how to gear the car correctly to where, you know, you don't sit at that deficit. If I didn't know or have the gearing and the suspension set up the way that it was, I would say that it would not work, you know, for sure.
So you'd need more power to basically act as a band-aid for not having everything else dialed into where it needs to be.
Yeah, but then you're spinning your wheels regardless. Like, I mean, you got more power and you don't have the rest and the car's not dialed, you're just doing yourself a disservice. So I think overall, I always want to tell people, like, just sit and learn with someone who's doing it right already, you know, because you can have 1,000 wheel, but your car's spinning the tires, you're just pluming up the track, you know, it's not going anywhere. A guy with 500 wheel is still outrunning you, or the car crab walks and, you can't get it to transition and the car is a mess. So it's really just about dialing in that setup and getting it all working well. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's easier to make power with more displacement. But if you've got something dialed in, like Steph Papadakis in his 4-cylinder.
Yeah. Again, we'll put a link to that episode as well in the show notes, because I think it's a nice different angle to what we're talking about here. But for those who are interested in more of the drifting technology, that was a really great conversation as well.
Cool.
In terms of the nitrous, because you just mentioned that, so I have to ask, how are you utilizing the nitrous? Is this more as a anti-lag strategy that switches off once the turbo's spooled up, or are you running that right the way through whenever you're above a certain throttle opening?
Yeah, so when I built that motor, I installed the entire setup ready to go. But then when it made 566 at 21, I was like, what's the point? My tracks that I was competing in at the time, the fastest you're going to get to about 84 mile an hour on entry. And after driving the car, I was like, I don't need nitrous to win. I'm just going to be tearing up the car even more. So I never actually sprayed it. But it was on a window, so it'd be sprayed between 2,800 and about 3,500, which could have just been really bad going that low. But that's what my theory was, to make up for the deficit in torque down low, just to get everything online and then just let the motor take over. Because once it gets up and going, it's like a freight train. It ain't going to stop very, very quickly. But
yeah, and there's a variety of ways that nitrous can be incorporated with a turbo, and the anti-lag strategy seems to be a pretty common and effective one. And you sort of mentioned there, bringing it in early could have been bad, and what's really easy to overlook, I mean, people think that nitrous is just some sort of magic sauce that we sprinkle on the engine and it just makes more power and torque, but the bit that's important to understand is, because it's a constant flow system, it's supplying the nitrous at a fixed rate based on your jet size. And of course, at lower RPM, the intake cycle, it takes longer, so you actually end up with more nitrous going into the combustion chamber, the rotor housing, at lower RPM than you would for that same nitrous shot at 6,000-7,000. So the problem with that is, if we bring it in too early, it can actually end up being quite damaging. So that's something I'm always very cautious with the nitrous setup, of making sure that it's not going to activate too low in the RPM range. Of course, I imagine if you're down at 2,500-3,000 RPM, something's probably gone wrong in a judge section anyway. So safe to say you shouldn't be there.
Yeah. Most of the driving's done above $4,000 anyway, especially with that big window,
All right, well, let's transition into another area that I'm really interested in learning more about, because you are a man of many talents, and you're also really well known for your wiring. And this is another area, just like anything with working on cars, that traditionally it's been quite hard for people to kind of learn the skills, particularly when we're talking about at the professional level. And this is one of those areas that gets a little tricky, what term we want to put on it. Personally, I like to use the term professional motorsport wiring, but technically or incorrectly, a lot of people call that a mil-spec harness. So, we'll use that term and understand that it's not truly a military specification harness, but because that terminology is thrown around. So, how do you teach yourself to build a mil-spec harness?
Well, I would, right away, I would say, don't touch anything until you've documented it first, right? Because you're not going to know where to start. You're not going to know what to buy. You're going to waste thousands of dollars and a ton of time if you just buy stuff and realize that gauge isn't going to fit into these connectors, or vice versa. But I would say that your best bet would be to, one, work under someone who is open-minded enough to allow you to help out. For instance, a couple buddies of mine, one actually, I've never worked personally with him, but I'm shooting this dude questions, all the time, is Mario at James Lynn Motorsport in Rancho Cucamonga, lead harness builder over there. He's helped me out exponentially with fairly technical stuff. which a lot of people wouldn't share that information. So shout out to that guy for being such a champ.
And actually, as well, at the same time, go check out James Lynn Motorsport's Instagram account if you want to see some top level wiring. Yeah, they produce some exceptional work. I think from my memory as well, a lot of their work goes on trucks, off-road sort of trophy trucks, pre-runners, etc. Yes.
Yeah. All the cool big, monster trucks, BJ Baldwin, all that stuff usually comes out of that shop. So great top level stuff. For me, learning was me trying stuff on my own car, and then cross-referencing it again with reputable material, reputable knowledge bases. A good buddy of mine, Andy Wyatt, and then not to toot your guys' horn, but your guys' course.
Oh, toot away.
Oh, I'm telling you, like anything that you can ingest that has a reputable source is only going to help you. So, I mean, there's times now where I'll be sitting on a project documenting something, blah, 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 and I haven't seen or I haven't visited this situation. So I'm like, you know what? Let me just check out the forum real quick. I'll log on to your guys' forum and I'll look around, and 90% of the time the answer's right there. And even if I have a hunch that it's that right direction, you can't professionally produce something unless you're 100% sure that the decision you're making is the correct one. There's no guessing. You're charging for a service that someone is expecting is perfect. So you best be perfect,
Absolutely.
So, knowledgeable, reputable material. You need to read it and understand it, and not just like copy it, but understand the whys of it. I always look at people in the industry who may not be wiring gurus or whatever, but Shane Tecklenburg or Paul Yah, and you look at their posts and you're like, man, what the is this? Like, sorry to cuss, but they're posting about this and they're like, why does this matter? But realistically, it does matter because they're verifying for themselves how something works so that they can find the best way forward. That's like really important.
I think that's a really often overlooked aspect, and it goes through the whole industry. There's people out there who can do a specific job, be that tune an engine and achieve a specific air fuel ratio, or build a wiring harness, or build an engine. But the problem is that they may not actually have a depth of knowledge of why they need to do what they're doing. And that, to a degree, sometimes, for the most part, is probably just fine. But when they get to that same situation that they've seen 10 times in the past and something's different, it gets thrown a curveball. And then because they don't have that depth of knowledge of what's going on in the background, they don't really understand why they're doing a specific thing in the first place. They've just been doing what they've always been taught. And that's where sometimes I think you can end up coming unstuck and come off the rails. So I'm a firm believer that you should have a depth of knowledge of the background fundamentals behind what you're doing, which is why we teach in the way we do. And if you understand that, it kind of sets you up, in my opinion, for you're going to be able to deal with situations you haven't seen before because you know the background knowledge. I think that's really important. Now, you also kind of just alluded to as well the planning stage, and I think that's an area that a lot of people at all levels of wiring get kind of stuck on, or maybe just kind of bypass. And I know it can be really tempting to sort of jump in with a roll of wire and some wire cutters and just start building a harness. But our saying's always been, if you fail to plan, then you're planning to fail. And I mean, I'm in the midst of building a harness and designing a harness at the moment for our FJ40 in-house project. And I'll probably spend, not quite, but almost as much time on the planning, the design, and the documentation as I will actually constructing the harness. And that's so critical, because then when you've got that full documentation, it's just like the roadmap. Then you're just building what you've designed, and the rest becomes easy. You can build it on a workbench. You're not hunched over an engine bay. And I always find that the end result is just superior. Plus, you've got that documentation to come back to in the future if it needs a modification or a repair. Is that sort of how your workflow goes as well?
Pretty much. You nailed it. And, repetition, including lengths for, some of the race guys out there, depending on what way you go with the build. But yeah, it's all about repeatability, troubleshooting. Sometimes guys just hand me off to their tuner, and I'll just upload a sheet like, hey, check this out. And if I never hear from them again, usually it all went well. But most of the time they're like, hey, where's this? And I'm like, oh, well, if you look on the document, it's right there. That wire color is right there, and they're like, oh, I didn't even know about this, blah, blah, blah. So it's just it's a way for me. I mean, I don't want to call myself a snob, but realistically, I don't really like talking to people. I don't like talking to the customers. And if I can allude to that and never have to speak to the customer again, not in a bad way, but if they never contact me again after they purchased a harness or a full car has been wired by us, that's like the best way that could ever happen.
It pretty much means that you've done your job right in the first place.
Yeah. And I mean, we do our best to make sure that everything in the future is going to be like future proof. For instance, extra injectors, or we'll put ignition system on its separate bulkhead all alone. I've had guys like, hey, I want to switch to a CDI setup. Well, if you put the ignition all together in a single loom, that's not going to, you're going to have to rebuild the whole setup. But if it's on its own connector and you make plans for it and use an oversized connector, you still have that in there, and be ready for it for the additional, like a current R32 I'm doing right now, all-wheel drive VR38 DT drag car, Texas mile stuff. He wanted room for 16 injectors. Sometimes I ask myself questions. I'm like, what are they going to do with 16 injectors? But at the end of the day, what if he knows something I don't? I don't really know that motor that well. I know that they're great, but 16 injectors makes room for it. That's what he gets. So. You put it on a little auto sport there, tucked in there, get the loom ready, measure everything out. When he wants it, hit us up. We'll make it for you, or we just supply it at the end of the day and he can do what he wants with it.
I think that's an area that a lot of people query us about when it comes to the design and building of a professional harness, in that by the time it's concentrically twisted, it's sheathed in DR25, you've got your autosport connectors and your heat shrink molded boots and transitions. You ain't getting into that harness to add or remove wires. So hence, you do really need to think about future proofing at the design stage. And again, just to kind of come back to exactly where I'm at with my FJ40 project at the moment, we've got a Motec M170 ECU, we've got a Motec C127 dash. We end up with, I think I'm using almost everything on that M170 header plug, but I think I've got from memory 3 spare analog voltage inputs, maybe 2 analog voltage inputs and a couple of spare outputs. So there's so little additional work required at the planning and construction stage to just add a breakout connector that's hidden up under the dash with those, and maybe for an analog voltage you're going to add a 5 volt and a sensor ground, and then you've just got a little connector, be it Autosport or DTM, it doesn't matter. I never ever use it, but if you want to add in another sensor at a later point, maybe I want barometric pressure or whatever it may be, it's so easy when you do that to add that. So we're doing exactly the same. We've got 2 Motec PDM32s. I've got some auxiliary outputs on those PDMs that I'm not going to be using. But again, I'm just going to add another breakout connector. So if I want to wire in some additional outputs at a later point, easy as, and it just takes so little additional work. So that's how we can deal with those sort of scenarios and future-proof a harness that otherwise wouldn't be serviceable.
Very true, very true. And that's it's just a part of going that extra mile to make sure that you don't run into a roadblock later on. I mean, you're already putting the time in. So if you put the time in, let's say, for us, it takes between 165 to 250 hours to do a full car. That's with like a 40 to 45 hours spent documenting. And usually you can't do the whole thing up front when you're working with customers, because 90% of the time they don't know what they're using, or stuff isn't where it should be, so, you'll plan for it. Okay, it needs this, but what if this module is slightly different than that module, or it's in a different spot, or yada, yada. I mean, I always tell people the best case scenario is if your car is ready to start without a wire attached and it's sitting in front of me.
Yeah, 100%. If you can have every single component where it's going to be, it just takes any guesswork and potential for mistakes out of the equation. But as you mentioned, and I'm guilty of this, myself. You build a car, you always seem to be working to a time crunch. You're waiting for components that haven't turned up. There's a late last minute change, and maybe you're using a different coil or ignition system or whatever, and all of a sudden that sort of requires some changes to the wiring. So I think, as well as you can plan it out, that's what you want to be doing, and making sure that within your capabilities, everything is in its final location. That's just going to make the whole job seamless. So just come back to the hours you mentioned, because this is another area we always get asked. How long does a harness take? So what did you say? Was it 125 to 250? Was that about right?
It was 165. To like 250.
I mean, obviously that's going to totally depend on the complexity of the job. So, right. Just got to take that into account. But I mean, I think it's really good for people to sort of have that understanding, because if they think they're going to bring their car to someone like yourself and get charged for 20 hours labor, I mean, that's not even going to get you the documentation, never mind starting the harness, correct?
Yeah, and I try to explain it to people, like you break it into like work weeks of like 40 hours, right? So 4, 8, 12, 120, that's 4 weeks, that's a month, right? And that's if everything is right in front of you, so then you divide that by like how many circumstances where everything's right in front of you. Someone has to order the hundreds, if sometimes thousands of parts that go into that harness construction. It's got to all go together perfectly, and then it has to be installed. And everything needs to make sure that it's like verified and working correctly. So, I mean, it's a massive process. It's a giant undertaking. And, we control every aspect of that as possible, from, the power and the ground system all the way up to where the stuff is located, like where we mount it. And that just helps us weed out issues. I mean, this is kind of hard, because people will be like, oh, I want this, and then I'll tell them like, okay, well, if we're going to do the car, then we have to do the grounding system, because I'm not going to hand you like a $12,000 setup, or a $14,000 or even $20,000 setup, and then you hook it up to like the worst grounding system ever, and you just start sheet metal grounding everything all over the place, and then you're pulling power from different parts all over the place, and it's like that's your foundation. That needs to be perfect, So I think, I wish, it's almost like HP should do another understanding what you're getting into. This is why wiring course, hosted by Aaron Parker.
Maybe we'll look at that in the future, perhaps.
Oh yeah. But, the grounding system is really important. Power supply is very important. Less is more in terms of like points, battery to 1 point up front, and then it's, comes out from there, star point, your 0 volt.
I think this is probably one of the areas that I see the most problems, and on face value, people think it's very simple, and it is when it's done right. It is the earthing strategy and that star point thing. We drum that in our wiring fundamentals course, because it is the source of so many potential problems. Getting that right is, as you say, the foundation for the rest of the wiring to actually work as it should. Well, look, Aaron, I think we'll move towards wrapping this up. We're getting probably a little bit long here, so we will move towards the last 3 questions, which are the same questions we ask all of our guests. And the first of those is, you've obviously got a lot on your plate at the moment. What's sort of on the radar for you in the future?
Yeah, so, I'm, luckily, again, shameless sponsor plug, Redline Synthetic Oil has funded my next build. So, that's going to be definitely multi-rotor, probably going to go into an FD, financial disaster, right? So I'm looking forward to that. I don't know if I'll be competing in Formula Drift. I've moved into stunt driving quite a bit. So that's, a lot of my work. I'm running Wolf Motorsports Wire, full-time pretty much, doing Donut Media host, Motor Trend host for a couple different shows there, and kind of just riding this wave out, I think the stunt driving has definitely been taking over quite a bit. I'm on a couple shows now. I'm going to be on an upcoming movie pretty soon. You'll probably never see me.
Stunt double.
Yeah. Man, stunt driving is a lot of fun. It is great.
I can
It's
only imagine.
Yeah, man, it is like next level fun because you get put in these really high stress. It's not even that high stress. I feel like competing and qualifying and drifting is so much more pressure than just like getting behind the wheel of something and like playing a cop and then like skidding into an intersection and then missing a couple cars and jumping out and firing blanks or something. You know, that's pretty cool. I've got an employee for my wiring business now. If you guys did want to check that out, it's Wolf Motorsports Wire on Instagram. New employee's name is Russell Stacy. He's great. He's got that attention to detail that you cannot teach. And the Motor Trend show should be coming out sometime. Oh man, end of the year. Donut HiLow series is already on YouTube. Seasons 1 through 3. We're shooting 3.5-ish. The lead up to the next season. Actually, we started 2 weeks ago. More of it tomorrow and the rest of the week. And yeah, if you want to follow me on my build, it's aaparka.300 on Instagram. I'll be releasing some more details, and obviously with these trying times, updates will be slightly slower because most of the parts are coming from your neck of the woods, which is just a part of building a car in 2022.
Yeah, it's the landscape has definitely changed a little bit with supply chain issues. With that rundown, Aaron, I don't quite know where you find time to sleep, but I mean, congratulations.
Oh.
What would we call you? Professional drifter turned media celebrity / everything else. And it just shows that for those listening, maybe who are a bit younger and upcoming, you can make a very interesting career in the industry. There's so many paths to take, which is a good segue into our next question. Given your vast experience and everything you've done so far up to this point, if you were to give advice to maybe the 16-year-old version of Aaron Parker, what would that advice be?
Man, I would hate to change anything, but I would say that a few things rung true to me that I just fixated on when I was a kid, and it's always do your best. I think that I was offered a job with Mad Mike I know that I was offered a job with Mad Mike because he saw that I could build a functioning and working drift car that was rotary and that it wasn't breaking and that, it was working. Everything I've been chosen to do or asked to do or been employed by, for instance, Odie Bakshis, was because I did a good job. He saw that I was on top of it, that I didn't leave anything unchecked, that I would catch things that other people would overlook. And just being intricate with the things, attention to detail is very important when it comes to motorsports because, that's the difference between, really hurting someone or functioning or not functioning at all.
Yeah, 100%.
Winning and losing, So I would say do your best with everything that you get into, whether that's motorsports or not. Even college, I hated school, but it taught me so much. And I did my best and I got through it and I learned very important things that got me to where I am today. So
yeah, I think that's something that's easy to maybe forget about or overlook is that you do end up in this life being judged on what you've done in the past. So you always want to put your best foot forward and do the best you can. And I mean, that's not always going to work out. Everyone has failings and makes mistakes, and that's also part of learning. But I mean, if you can put your head on the pillow at night and say with honesty that you did the best that you could in a situation, well, I mean, that's all anyone can ever ask. I think the other thing that you mentioned there is really valuable there is work ethic, which kind of goes hand in hand with doing your best, and that attention to detail. What I often find, and I've seen this with people I've employed over the years in the past as well, it's not just the job that you've been tasked with doing, but look at the big picture. If you see something that isn't specifically about the task that you're asked to do that's wrong, fix it or speak up, tell someone else about it. That should go without saying, but unfortunately, I find time and time again it does need to be said. So, looking at the big picture and understanding how everything kind of interacts, that's going to go a long way. All right. Well, you've already pretty much answered our last question, which was if people want to follow this wild journey you're on, where can they do so? You've mentioned your Instagram there, and we will, of course, put those links in the show notes to make it super easy for people to get involved and check out what you're up to. Look, Aaron, it's been a great chat. I'm sure that the Rotary fanatics out there will have learned a thing or two from you, as well as those who are interested in learning more about wiring. So again, thank you for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, man, it's been great. Looking forward to the next time, my man.
Cheers. We'll talk soon. If you enjoyed this episode of Tuned In with Aaron Parker, we'd love it if you could drop a review on your chosen podcasting platform. These reviews really help us to grow our audience, and that helps us continue to get bigger and better guests. To say thanks, each week we'll be picking a random reviewer and sending them out an HPA t-shirt anywhere in the world. This is a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and I'll do my best to answer them if your review gets picked. So this week, a big shout out to The Hutch, who's said, "Thank you for the podcast. I didn't really hear any downsides for tube and fin intercoolers in your recent Plasma Man video. Maybe they're a little bit fragile." So the Hutch here is referring to a video interview we did with Plasma Man when we were at World Time Attack, and basically we were having a chat about the differences between a tube and fin and a bar and plate intercooler. And I think probably you've nailed it there, in that I've personally experienced a tube and fin factory intercooler from a Mitsubishi Evo getting a hole in it thanks to some gravel being thrown up by a car that I was following. So they're definitely a little bit thinner, and that can make them a little bit more fragile. Obviously nothing that we can't get around with proper protection in front of them. The other thing, and this really comes down to what we talked about in the interview with Plasma Man, there is a little bit less, I should say, thermal mass in the tube and fin intercooler core compared to the bar and plate. Pros and cons with that depending on your specific application though. So thank you for your comment there, The Hutch. Please get in touch with your size and shipping details, and we'll get a fresh tee shipped out to you pronto. All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention, for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school, and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now, remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpaacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our Gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a Gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpaacademy.com/courses.